Welcome to my channel, fellow rotorheads. Today we're flying around the dusty, hot flatlands of central Texas, and we're going to be doing our first instructional video. In response to some questions and requests, I'm going to share with you what a person having trouble landing might consider doing. But first, borrowing a line out of Paul Harrell's YouTube channel, I'm not a pilot. Don't listen to me if you want to live. I'm only explaining what I do. I'm not in any way trying to tell you what to do. In order of increasing difficulty, these are the different types of helicopter flight regimes. Cruise at altitude, takeoffs, hover, landing, drift, loop, backflip, and barrel roll. Today we'll focus on landing. We'll do it the way a CFI might teach you. Not that I'm familiar with that, but basically to say slow and controlled landings. The reason is once you get good at that, you'll become more confident about handling the helicopter. And with the mistakes you make, start to learn the kinds of recovery techniques that enables you to respond successfully, and that will lead you to more confident flying outside the slow and controlled regime. First, we'll understand what the helicopter wants to do as far as aerodynamics. And though I was going to explain in more technical detail what's going on, I'm finding that to be kind of boring and I don't think you guys want to hear about it. So I'm just going to focus on what's actually happening and how you manage it. A helicopter kind of produces a loss of lift, almost like an airplane stall at low speed. So you need to be prepared for that. I'll demonstrate what happens if you're not prepared for that. As we come in, lowering the collective on a controlled descent into the landing zone, if I don't touch the collective after I've set it for my descent, the helicopter wants to just fall out of the sky below a certain speed. Now here I've set the controls in such a way that I'm descending at about 500 feet per minute and the helicopter is gradually slowing down. I'm only going to use my cyclic control to maintain that 500 feet per minute descent rate without any further adjustment on the collective. I keep pulling back on the stick in an attempt to maintain that 500 feet per minute descent rate, and at some point I reach a critical speed where the helicopter is no longer able to maintain that and it starts dropping straight out. And in case that's not obvious, that's considered a crash, something to be avoided. The speed that happens at depends on many things, but is generally between 35 to 40 knots, just below the green zone on the dial. Now I'll go ahead and do it again, except this time we'll use the collective to keep our descent rate at 500 feet per minute and use the cyclic to slow ourselves down. The two of these controls are used in conjunction. They both affect each other. Try to use the cyclic to slow yourself down by pitching the nose up. Try to use the collective to adjust your descent rate. Now I'm using Grand Prairie Municipal Airport for this because it's flat and free of obstructions. You can use whatever you like, but that's what I recommend. The ICAO is KGPM. For this first landing illustration, I'm just going to land somewhere on the runway. Let's not quibble about specifically where. What I want to do is get the structure of the landing mechanics down. Now the first thing that I would want to do is get really far from my landing zone. So I'm going to fly real far and barely see the runway. And as I approach at cruising speed and altitude, I want to be able to visualize basically a glide slope, almost like what an airplane would use. An airplane will come in at a constant speed down this glide slope, and at the very end, they want to get to stall speed right as the wheels touch ground, and they do their flare, and you get a nice smooth landing. A helicopter isn't coming in at a constant speed, it's slowing down gradually, bleeding off all this energy. And so we want to be at a good enough distance that we can bleed off that energy in this helicopter and slow it down all the way down, following the same glide slope. It does have to be a gradual glide slope, and we're slowing down the entire time. I'm going to adjust my collective down to start the descent, and at the same time pull the stick back to keep the descent from becoming too steep. So those two motions happen at the same time. We'll pick something like 500 feet per minute as a target descent rate. mostly controlled by the collective, and use the stick to slow yourself down gradually. As you pull the stick back to slow yourself down, the helicopter may want to wander off that 500 feet per minute descent rate. It may want to actually rise. To control that, you push the collective down so that you maintain the 500 feet per minute descent rate. Check your position relative to the runway and see if you're going to make it based on your current descent rate and speed. If you're going to overshoot or undershoot, adjust your speed with the cyclic to make it to some point on the runway. If you're overshooting and you want to slow down, push the collective down and the stick back. That will decelerate your velocity. If you're undershooting and you need to advance a little bit, you raise the collective a little bit and push the cyclic forward, and that will increase your speed while maintaining your descent rate. It's around the 60 knot area that you want to be paying close attention, that your helicopter is already starting to lose a little lift. You're going to have to start lifting the collective. And below 40 knots, it's going to suddenly do that, and not really radically suddenly, but at a greater rate than has been happening. So you need to be able to pick it up on the collective smoothly and quickly so that you're compensating for that and you're not suddenly all going out of control. And as you pull up on the collective, the helicopter is going to want to turn on you because of the increased torque. So you're going to have to push on a pedal to help keep the helicopter straight. Left pedal if it's an American helicopter, right pedal if it's a European helicopter. And so here we've come into a nice steady hover, and we're somewhere in the middle of the runway. We'll go around and do it again, and this time we'll pick a specific spot on the runway, like the threshold, to land on as our target. So on this go around, we're going to do exactly the same thing as we did before, except this time we're going to fixate on the target landing zone, which is the end of the runway threshold. Now, starting back from as far as we are, we're going to again pick that 3 to 10% glide slope, and knowing that we can achieve that at a reasonable descent rate, we're going to start coming down and following that string that stretches between the landing zone and the helicopter. We're going to follow that down, slowing down the entire time. And as you slow down, simultaneously you're slowing down your rate of descent. So the collective is kind of a magic stick in this case. You're pushing it down to start your descent, but you're also pulling it back up as you're trying to slow your rate of descent. So you're pushing it up and down as you travel in the same direction. The collective is basically a lever that allows you to adjust the lift to get the helicopter to do what you want it to do. So one of the things to keep note of is that as you're slowing down, the pitch of the helicopter is changing. The nose is rising, which makes the landing zone drop. And if you're on a monitor, it could look like the helicopter is ascending rather than descending, and it can throw off your landing. This is an advantage that VR has over a flat monitor, that when you're landing, you can see where the landing zone is, even though the helicopter is changing in its attitude. Now this time, instead of fixating on your rate of descent, you're going to fixate on the landing zone. And you're using your collective to control your rate of descent so that that line, that glide slope that you're on, stays consistent, while using the cyclic to slow yourself down. And finally, as you get close to the landing zone, you're now going to shift your eyes to the horizon, because you can't be looking down and landing. You're going to throw yourself completely off and end up in a hangar upside down. So you want to be using your peripheral vision to put the helicopter down exactly where you want it, but you want to keep your eyes on the horizon to keep the helicopter steady. Now, if you've done everything right, you should reach the landing zone, just managing to reach a hover right above the landing zone. And you can use the collective to slowly settle you down, understanding that the helicopter is going to want to shimmy around because of the changing torque. So again, you use the pedals to keep yourself straight and steady. And finally, remember to put the collective down slowly so as not to flutter the blades and cause a tail strike. Now, this has all been a nice, easy, basic setup to learn how to do this well. Things that make this much more difficult are landing on an elevated platform, not only because it's hard, but because Microsoft has a bug that causes an exaggerated ground effect. Landing on moving surfaces because the surface is moving, you're moving, and the surface is usually elevated, which tends to have the elevated platform ground effect bug. Steep descent angles because it tends to mean you have obstructions you have to avoid all around you that you need to keep an eye out for while putting yourself on the landing zone and also keeping an eye on what a horizon might be to keep the whole shebang steady. Landing in super tight constraints like on a trailer, and landing where circulating air completely throws off helicopter aerodynamics, and many more. But in my opinion, that's what makes helicopters challenging and fun. In other words, not boring. No shade on our fixed-wing brothers, I'm just speaking the truth here. My fellow rotorheads know what I'm talking about, right? Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you've learned something from it. I hope I haven't made too many mistakes. I hope I don't get called out by real pilots. I hope Mr. D doesn't end up laughing at me. But I just thought I'd share some of the things I do when I land because some people seem to think it looks pretty cool and they'd like to be able to do it too. I look forward to your comments and questions as always. I always read them and I often comment. And until next time, may the feeling of that rotor wash over you.
Huh? Yeah, boy. Yeah, boy.